Welcome, everyone. Today here we have Larry of Zebrium. Larry is the founder and CTO of Zebrium. He started the company with the vision that machine learning could be used to automatically detect software problems by structuring and learning patterns in logs and metrics. Before Zebrium, Larry was the chief data scientist at Nimble Storage, founding that company's data science team and architecting/implementing their petascale platform for automation and analytics. He also started NetApp's engineering informatics group as senior engineer, invented Glassbeam's ETL-focused SPL technology as CTO and co-founder, and received a leadership award from the International Congress on Neural Networks as a graduate student. Thanks for joining us today, Larry.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'll also have to say congratulations. So I saw that the company was recognized as one of the AI 50 by Forbes, which is, for those that don't know, essentially one of America's most promising companies to watch. So congrats on that.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, it was exciting to come by it. Where I want to kick things off is, would love to understand, just high level, who your customers are, who's the user of your product, and what is the core issue that your product is solving for the customer?
Right. So, to talk a little bit about the typical user. So 20 years ago, if you sold software, what would happen would be, they'd put it in a box, or maybe it was a download, but the idea was that was installed on some server at the user's premises, or maybe at your desk or in your data center. And then there was a support organization at the vendor that was geared up to kind of help you with any issues that would come up. That model is kind of going away very quickly. And in fact, today, at least, in the Valley, what we see a lot more of is what's referred to as either a DevOps model or an SRE model. And what that means is you've got some application that you've deployed. And by the way, this is all as a result of sort of SaaS, the growth of software service, right?
Cloud.
So the idea is that you've got an application that you sell, or some service that you sell, but there's going to be a deployment of that. Now, that may be on-prem. Typically, these days, newer companies are doing it in, say, in Amazon or Azure or something like that. But then you've got a number of servers that are set up to kind of deliver that service. And now you've got a very small band of people who are responsible for maintaining that service for anywhere from hundreds to hundreds of thousands of users.
Right.
So it used to be, if there was a problem, it would impact one user at a time. You would get one support person with some amount of time to work with, and they'd get a few log files or whatever off the machine, and they would figure out the problem. Now, if there's a problem with the deployment, what happens is, you could have 10,000 users affected by that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And what is really quickly, the log file, what is that telling us when they go to look at the log file?
Yeah, so typically an application that you deploy, let's just take a simple example of a database, say, is going to be outputting information all the time about what it's doing. And that gets stored in a file if it's a sort of a server installed a software package, or if it's in a container, maybe it'll go to the container logs through Docker. But regardless, it's outputting things that say, okay, I just did this, I just opened this file, I just, this user just connected, and so on, like that. So then when something goes wrong, you need to get a hold of that information, say, okay, put together a narrative, right? So the problem is now that you've got a lot more complexity in an application deployment, a lot more moving parts, and a lot more riding on resolving the issue quickly. Mm-hmm. So what's happened is you've got people who, you've got a good, even elite DevOps teams. The biggest pain point is MTTR, meaning mean time to resolve. If there's some kind of an issue or a degradation of service or an outage, how long does it take me to resolve it? So what happens is that, people will automate the things that they know about They'll try to automate the resolution or the identification, at least, of what happened. And that's fine for things you know about. The problem is, more than half the time, it's going to be something you don't know what happened. It never happened before, or it's a new flavor of something that may have happened before. And so you can't have built rules to deal with that. And so that whole hunting and pecking sort of activity really, to me, was the opportunity. So the idea was, can we use machine learning to look at the data that the applications, the infrastructure are outputting? There's a whole ton of log files at different levels of the stack. Let's get all those together. Let's structure them into a relational database. Let's grab metrics too. Now let's kind of find anomalies in those data streams. And then let's take it one step further, which is, if we've done a good enough job of that, can we find correlations among those anomalies in different parts of the service that indicate an incident has occurred, something bad, number one. And number two, can we get all the right data and sort of pieces of evidence together into an incident report and put it in front of the DevOps engineer? So that's really what Zebrium does.
And am I right in saying that where you excel is finding those incidences that the DevOps team hasn't been able to, where they haven't, that they haven't noticed?
Yeah, so there's really two parts. There's the identification of the incident that something went wrong.
Okay.
And for an elite team, they may always know something went wrong. They may just not be able to tell what. And for that team, there's also the identification of the root cause indicators. Can we find in this data the root cause indicators and put them into a concise report so that you don't have to go looking and searching for that data? So there's really two pieces to it.
Okay, got it. And so does the team, how do they interact with your tech? Is there a interface that they interact with? What does that look like?
Yeah, we have a couple of ways. I mean, so there's a sort of a web, a UI that you could log into. You can set up alerts. We actually integrate with as outputs to sort of PagerDuty, Slack, VictorOps, that sort of thing. What's really interesting is we can also take feeds from other tools. So as an example, if I've already got metrics alerts set up in Prometheus, I'm looking for spikes or whatever in CPU or whatever it is I'm looking for, then Zebrium can take that as a signal and correlate it to other anomalies throughout the stack and append stuff to the incident you've already created. So we have a two-way integration with a number of tools. So that's actually pretty interesting. So you'll see stuff in your Slack feed by default. Go to the UI, email, but then you can set up your own tools too. You have to integrate, right? Because people already have ways to manage these things.
Right. And so the metric that you referred to, MTTR, is there some sort of, when you're speaking to clients, is there some sort of ROI that you're communicating based on MTTR or some other metric that you may reference?
I mean, it's kind of tough to put together a concrete ROI for a given user. It's all going to depend upon, the economics of their application and their DevOps team and where that team is based and how it's tooled. So you can't really walk in with a number, but it's interesting. So I'd say the most comprehensive sort of industry report that comes out yearly in this area is called the State of DevOps. It always makes the round in the Valley, and that talks all about MTTR. Everyone knows when you come in and you say MTTR, they say yes, that's what I need to worry about. So we don't really have to get too detailed about that.
Right. So then I guess if you were referencing case studies, right, as you're talking to a customer, are you able to provide some sort of metric where they say this could either save us money or make us money, right, or keep us out of trouble?
Right. Well, it's interesting, right? So there's kind of two ways to look at that. So one is most of these organizations I'm talking about, they're already spending some amount of money to store their logs data. And it's not cheap. Right. Typically they'll be spending, $2 a gigabyte, something like that, to store this data. And so, because when at ingest time we structure the data, we're able to store it in a much more efficient format than the raw text. We can actually offer typically the same or less price than they're paying to store their data right now, depending on what services they're using to store that. So really, you don't get a lot of pushback on that sort of cost. Really, the question people want to have answered is it going to work on my data?
Okay.
Right? Because every application is different. So we show examples. We have a ton of examples. We have some users on the site, some examples, some blogs where we go through, here's an incident, and here's the kinds we create, and here's the kinds of problems we caught, and all that. So people get that. But in the end, you got to see it work on your own stack, and every stack is different. That's what's interesting is when you have your own application, the logs it outputs and the structure that has, and what is an anomaly in that application is going to be different from any other. And so that's why I feel like, we kind of have something special here, because you're not coming in trying to impose a bunch of pre-written rules on a new application. You're learning the structure of that application from scratch. I think that resonates pretty well. People kind of get that idea.
Okay. So in thinking about how you built out the product from day one, what did that look like? Did you yourself develop the first version of the product, or did you work alongside a co-founder to do that?
Yeah, no. I started by myself, and what I wanted to get right, like absolutely nail in a way that hadn't been done before, was the structuring of the data. So if you think of a log file, or if you think of an event that gets put into a log file, it may say something like user Bob logged in. Let's just say that's what it says. So then over time, you may see that same message logged again, but this time it'll say user Judy logged in.
Right.
So now, how good of a job can you do at picking out that that's a username there in the middle? That's a variable part, but the rest of it is the same. So you have to say that's the same kind of an event, right? But it's this little bit is a parameter. And now you can imagine doing that for a whole number of parameters in that event. And typing those. So like if it's numbers and dates, you deal with it one way and so on. And so actually getting that in real time as you're ingesting the data and updating that sort of metadata, I think we do that an order of magnitude better than anyone else. And so I wanted to nail that. And once I nailed that, it was possible to go and find investors that were interested in the technology, and let's see if we can commercialize that, because it was definitely new, and it still is, and I think we do that better than anyone.
So if I'm understanding correctly, was it that you built an MVP? Once you had the MVP ready to go, did you first go and test it out on customers, or did you go to investors and say, I have this awesome tool, and the investor understood it and said, hey, look, let me help you run with that? Right.
So we had a technology. We did not have an MVP. So we selected a market, and that's what we raised money to take a bet in that market. And that was this sort of DevOps market, right? And so once we've done that, now the question is, how do we make sure it works, and how do we test that in the real world? So we had, I want to say, over 50 customers that were nice enough to share with us their incident data. In other words, their logs and metrics that had been collected around when something had gone wrong. And then we were able to look at that and say, okay, let's run our algorithms against this. Let's see how good of a job we did.
Right.
And so we ended up in a situation where, right out the gate, we were seeing about 65% power. So there's kind of a there's kind of a precision and a recall. So in recall, we were getting over 65%, which means that much of the time we're getting the root cause. So we didn't consider it a success unless we actually put the root cause indicators into the incident report. So that kind of full-blown success was 65%. Precision is actually, as a number, isn't so important to us. Here's the interesting part. It's not so much the precision of false positives that you're interested in. It's not so much, that's not how you want to characterize it. The way you want to characterize it is a person who's looking at the incidents has a finite amount of bandwidth per day. And no matter how complex your environment is or how many incidents you actually have, really you want to keep it below 5 things to look at a day, or you're going to saturate the person. So really there's a fixed output bandwidth for our tool. And so that's something that we've kind of built in from the beginning. So it's kind of adaptive in that sense.
Okay. Makes sense. And I want to make sure I got this piece right, because I think it's important in terms of how the company itself developed. Is it that you developed the technology, or not developed the technology, you had an idea and a basic framework for how you would build the technology, presented the idea, and had some backers say, look, I think this is a great idea, and then we're able to use that to then build the product?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so I had a lot of experience in the Valley working with machine data, log files, and metrics to do all kinds of stuff, analytics and product quality, and all the way to sort of troubleshooting tools or whatever else. So that was kind of what I brought into the table, as well as this technology that structured it well enough that I felt I could use it to do what I had been doing manually for years.
Right.
So that was really the impetus. And then the thought was, well, here's a place where that's needed right now. It's needed in this sort of monitoring space. Let's make a play there.
Okay. Yeah. And I think what's interesting about that is you generally hear, right, build an MVP, and then either go get your first few customers based on the MVP, and then go get investor dollars, right? But you could but it's interesting to hear a case study where you kind of take a different approach, which I imagine requires an investor that understands the technology.
Yeah, I think to a degree that's true, or at least understands that there's a piece missing and can see that your technology fits that piece, right?
Okay. And so I want to think through the go-to-market, right, initially. It sounds like at first you went out, you had 50 customers and said, let's just see what happens, right? Let's see what value we could produce. Is that the approach you took at first with those first 50 customers, and did it change post?
Yeah, so those people, some of them did not actually ever become customers, because not all of them had what you would call DevOps shops. Okay. Some of them are not in the country. Some of them, are still running support organizations, but they have the kind of data that we were looking for. Got it. So those were kind of, I would call them almost early partners. I mean, they were people who were helpful to us to give us data sets to see how we're doing, and then based on that we could iterate, right? I think what you see now is people come in and they get the value prop and they expect it to work, and they're not kind of like, oh, let's run an experiment, all of that. I mean, they'll do a trial. So we have a free trial. You have to do that. You give them a month for free to, at scale, to try whatever they want. And then after that, they figure out, how much is it worth to them, or do they need some features added, and so on. It's interesting because, so there's kind of two product offerings that we have, right? And it's turned out that, so we've got a new value prop, and that is autonomous incident and root cause detection, right? Nobody knows what that is. No one's walking down the street thinking, oh, I got to go find autonomous incident and root cause detection. What they're thinking is, I need a log manager. I'm already spending money, or I'm going to spend money on it. Which one should I get? So they can take ours and they can get that benefit. So we've got this sort of incremental benefit over what they could get from another spend, right? Alternatively, this is really interesting. So there's service providers, right? Managed service providers who manage other people's infrastructure for them. Maybe they have a colo, or maybe they just don't want to deal with, they don't want to operationalize and hire those people, so they outsource it to an MSP. But in any case, now you've got a group of people who's responsible for monitoring lots of these environments, lots of these applications. They love this thing. In fact, they don't even need it for the log management. What they do is we have a mode where you can just let the data flow into our service. We create or augment everybody's incidents, depending on what tool they're using, if they're using ours or PagerDuty or whatever they're using. So we'll augment those incidents with the root cause and the report and all that. That's it. They never log in. They never see any UIs. They don't do any of that. They just want to know, what's the bottom line? Give me a clue. Help me out here. And so really there's kind of two classes of customers. So you're trying to find these use cases where your incremental value can either trump an existing product, or can create an opportunity that's maybe smaller per customer, but a much wider opportunity that no one's been able to address, right?
Yeah, very interesting. And I'm curious in terms of how you actually connected with, so let's say those first 50 partners, right? How did you actually connect with those first 50 partners to get them to provide you access with the data you need? With the idea, maybe you built case studies out of this.
Right.
But how did you get those first 50? And then as you transition into actually selling the product, then what's the strategy into getting those incremental customers there?
Yeah, so I'd say maybe a third of them we reached out to see if there was interest in at least participating in this sort of exploration. The rest of them, either we knew personally through our networks or our investors knew.
Okay.
So we were able to connect through that mechanism. I mean, basically, you'll take it wherever you can find it, right?
Yeah.
But the other, what's interesting, so I think from an general AI company perspective, what's interesting is, so I don't know how common this will be, but for us, yeah, having 50 data sets. And when I say data sets, I mean 50 stacks. So these are different applications. Now, each one may have multiple incidents to look at, but there's 50 stacks you're looking at, right? It's 50 applications. That's not the whole universe, right? And it's not even that much data. So if you look at the number of incidents, you're still talking hundreds, right? Up to 1,000 that we've looked at so far, right? So it's not like your Google where you're seeing a billion new web pages every day. Right. So at the beginning, there's a scale of data at which it's still more of an art than a science. So you do your best to apply the sort of principles that you have seen work in the literature that other people are doing. You improve them, you get good results. But at the end of the day, there's a scale at which, you're still in the art mode, and then maybe at another 2 orders of magnitude, we would tip into the science mode, at which point we don't have to think about, let's go dig in and why is the application doing this and what can we improve. It's like you can automate that training. And so there's this awkward regime where depending on how much data you have, you need to approach it differently. So I think that's useful to keep in mind for folks who are thinking about starting a company. How much data, training data or validation data, or however you want to think about it, how much of that do you really have? If it's just a little bit, you're going to have to start like an art, not a science. If you've got enough, there's well-established procedures to start sort of looking at that data and training algorithms on it, right? So
yeah. No, very interesting. And what I also find interesting is for most startups, you're thinking about how do you go to market, how do we get those first few customers. A lot of times it's, hey, look, you really have to go through relationships, and it sounds like for someone like yourself having a background in the space, right? It allowed you to kind of reach out and say, hey, listen, let's partner together, and in that way they get to see how the product works, but you also get the data, right? As you just talked about, you get the data that you need to train.
You're gonna need data.
But then you also have this investor who says, you know what? Presumably it's an investor with a ton of software companies, and it's saying, well, we got a number of software companies that we can help you gather some data from and build some case studies and help train your algorithms.
That's right. Yeah.
In that way as well. So very, very interesting. And now moving into kind of the managed service providers, MSPs. Where they're going to have you get one provider, they have 10 customers. I'm just throwing a number out there. It's a ton more data you get to look at. So very interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I'm curious. Okay, so you brought the technical chops, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the technical, the data science chops to the company. I'm curious how generally you're thinking about growing the team, or have thought about growing the team, that next hire that's going to help develop this AI portion of the product.
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting, right? So I think what we're looking for is, so it's good to have customers. It's good to have paying customers. What you want to see, I think, when you feel like you've really nailed it in the way we want to nail it, is you want to see sort of an exponential takeoff of interest.
Right.
And so I think, right now what we're trying to figure out is kind of, how to seed that and how to get awareness of this kind of, no one's thinking, let me go get this kind of solution. They're not even thinking it's possible, right? It's not in people's awareness. So we've been doing a lot of work to try to seed that awareness.
Okay.
Posting things on Hacker News. Of course, there's the blogs, there's paid advertising, there's SEO. It's all kind of things you do. But once we hit that, I think at that point we'll need to scale up really quickly. So that's kind of right. So you're waiting at any moment. It's going to be go, and then right. So I have some really good ideas about how I want to scale the company in terms of people. I think there's going to be a lot of room for data scientists, machine learning engineers. There's going to be a lot. I mean, that's what we're going to need. Hopefully we'll be able to attract them with the fact that we've got a real product doing something that's really unique that they can put, on their resume and also probably make a lot of money from participating in. So.
Yeah. So has this, historically, right, you got a ton of folks who believe this in-office environment, right? But now that we've been forced into remote work, does that change how you think about, who and how you hire?
It's interesting. I'd say most of the technical staff has been more as productive or more productive than they were prior. Yeah, because now they don't have a life. I mean, everyone's. I don't want to be negative. That's not quite true. People do go out, but there's a lot less time in traffic and all that stuff. But you lose a lot. And I think what you lose is the sort of informal conversations that happen in the office. The truth is that a successful company, it's not that, the great new ideas or the great new initiatives or the great new observations, they come from top down, and that's what people discuss at lunch. It's the things that people discuss at lunch. If you've hired a good core of people, those are the things that make their way to the top.
Right.
That's the way it works. It's like water into a tree. So, we've kind of. Sorry, I got something ringing.
No worries.
So the way we've, trying to address that is talk more on the phone, like have personal conversations with each other about things we're working on, as opposed to just typing them back and forth in Slack or in Jira or whatever. Actually, like talk to each other. Also, we try to have social get-togethers. Now, it's not completely social, but it's mostly just shooting the breeze. And,
there you go.
Right? Mostly just shooting the breeze, but once a week we just all get together on Zoom. We talk about our kids and pets or hobbies or weekend or whatever it is that comes up.
Yeah, no, I'm always interested in perspectives here, right? Because we definitely had a shift. At one point, to your point, you could get together as a team and have lunch, but now I can't imagine a scenario where everyone would continue to sit in front of the computer, eating their lunch and just, maybe it happens, I don't know, but having a conversation. But then on the other side, when you think about some of the merits of a fully remote team, right? Now you can hire anywhere in the world. Time zone and connectivity, internet speed is important, but it's a different perspective on talent acquisition.
It is. That's a good point.
I do want to go back to, because you mentioned in regards to awareness, right? Yeah. People aren't. You're not selling Nike basketball shoes, right? Yeah. You're not selling something that's very intuitive and someone's like, yes, I can pick this up. I understand it from day one, and it's still a newer field. I'm curious when you do have these conversations, right? And my thought, initially is that it'd be tough to talk to, in general, a CEO about these issues because, they're not as in the weeds of the technical, right? Who are you having the initial conversations with, and who are the folks in the organization that, let's say, for lack of a better word, that you need to pitch and that get it?
Right. That's So it's almost always going to be the team or the manager of the team that's on the ground doing DevOps or SRE. SRE is Site Reliability Engineer. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, sometimes they're not. A DevOps engineer is typically more hooked into engineering. If you have a SaaS service where there's a continuous deployment cycle, sometimes there's a different kind of profile for the person you hire to do this work. But in general, the concepts and responsibilities overlap. So,
Okay.
so those really, if you can get in front of that group, and you get a couple people that look and say, okay, this is worth taking for a spin because it's really going to solve my headache. Then it just comes down to, does it work for them? I mean, the other interesting thing about being a small startup is, you can't afford to test. You can't afford to test every conceivable use case. You don't have every conceivable feature. It's not going to work for everybody, but sometimes they'll come out and say, okay, get back to us when you have X, or, let's touch base in a month, or yeah, let's start right now. And then you get in, you do a POC, 30-day POC, and you prove it out.
And in regards to the AI, what the capabilities you have with machine learning, is that generally a selling point, or are your customers saying, look, just get the job done? I don't care how you get it done.
I'd say it's a hook in the sense that it makes people stop and think, okay, maybe there's something new here and I don't know what it is yet, as opposed to it's another version of X that I already have. So that I think is how it becomes useful. But in the end, people want to know, okay, they want an overview of how it works, whatever you call it, call it machine learning or whatever you call it. They want to give it to me kind of, really simple. Give it to me in a way that a 5-year-old could understand it. How does this thing work and what's it doing?
Right.
So you always have to have that kind of a conversation. The way I always talk about what we do is I'll say, and so, anyone who's an ML engineer or a data scientist will get how simplified this is, but it's actually really useful. Is I'll say, yeah, so really what you're looking for is signs of weirdness and badness. And when you see weird things happening, things that are rare, perhaps, very close before things that are bad, and so in that time interval between them is short enough that it's very unusual that you see rare things and bad things happening that close together, you raise an incident. Mm-hmm. And people get that. Right. So you need to have some way to explain it that just talks about at a high level, what are you doing? Nobody wants to hear, oh, it's really complicated. Oh, you wouldn't understand it. Oh, who wants to hear that?
That's actually probably a turnoff. Well,
That's right.
I don't know what I'm getting then. I don't know if I want to spend money.
Right.
Okay, awesome, very helpful. Okay, so glad that you guys are off the ground with this product. The question that I have for you is, if you had to start from day one, right? You guys aren't 10 years old yet, but we're going to ask this anyway. But if you had to start from day one, knowing everything you know now, what would the first 90 days look like?
Huh. Yeah, boy. Well, that's a good one.
You've done a lot right so far.
Yeah, I think so. Part of the perspective we came in with was, it's not just proving the technology, which we were able to do, kind of by ourselves without paid customers. Like I said, we got data sets from people, but proving the market, proving the product market fit. I've learned that is incredibly important. And coming into this experience, I don't think I may have been able to say words that were kind of right, but I didn't really get what that means. Unless you live through this, it's hard to say what that means. I think, so we came in with the hypothesis that in order to create budget for this opportunity, people would need to displace an existing budget item. Mm-hmm. You don't want to make them have to create a new budget for something that's new. Now you've got two new things that you have to deal with. So the idea was, let's create a log manager that can replace other log managers or supplement whatever other collection they're doing, and that will be our beachhead. But as it turns out, since that's kind of it's an established sort of product, mm-hmm. People are in contracts already. It's not going to expire for 3 to 6 months. Oh, you know, I'm happy with my log manager. Is there a way I can just use this thing by itself? So if I had it all to do over again, I would say let's come up with the standalone method that I think I mentioned for the MSPs that is very popular, but I mean, anyone can use it. But the idea is, can we just isolate this piece of value, and say, yeah, you will have to create budget for it. That budget will also be less than it would be for a log manager, but it's still new budget. It's not insignificant. I think I would have gone that way first.
Okay. Very helpful. Very helpful. And I've seen scenarios where, you know, the rip and replace strategy can be very tough to overcome, especially for, you know, you've got some folks who have 3-year contracts. Right.
Exactly.
And then when you consider, you know, some of the contracts are structured to pay up front, it's like, well, you know, I know that we're going to get some use out of this, but if you're asking me to take out my old system, I got to make sure, you know, I got to report to the advisory board or the board of directors and justify why we let go of a project that we hadn't fully, you know, got our ROI from yet.
Yes, that's right. You got it.
All right. Awesome. Well, Larry, thank you for spending some time with us today. This was very helpful, and you were able to break down a topic that I'm sure most of us didn't have a background in previously. So thanks again, and we look forward to tracking your progress as you move forward.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. Have a great one.